All right, let's dive right into this explainer on the State of Meridian versus Marcus Hale. Picture this. You're stepping into the high-stakes shoes of a forensic statistician, and you've been brought in to analyze evidence in a massive $1.8 million fraud case. The defendant, Marcus Hale, is a former vice president of finance at Lakeshore Regional Health System, and he's accused of embezzling nearly $2 million by routing inflated vendor invoices to a sketchy shell company. We're going to evaluate all the evidence together: financial patterns, DNA probabilities, and the incredibly heavy emotional weight of the victim impact statements. But here's the catch for you. You aren't the judge, and you definitely aren't the jury. You are the expert witness.
As an expert witness in this true crime scenario, your golden rule is actually pretty simple on paper, but it's incredibly difficult to maintain in practice. You must interpret the data honestly, no matter what it shows. The attorney who retained you is the one writing your check, and let's be real, they have a very clear agenda. They want to win. They want you to use your brilliant expertise to build a completely bulletproof narrative. But your professional obligation is to serve the truth, not the attorney. Your analysis absolutely cannot take sides. If the math points to innocence, you have to say so. And if it points to guilt, you have to say so.
So what happens when the truth gets a little complicated and the pressure in the room is sky high? You know, in the sterile, quiet environment of a classroom or a lab, numbers are just numbers. But in a courtroom where a person's freedom and literally millions of dollars are on the line, the data becomes a total battleground. We're going to look at the psychological traps and cognitive biases that are basically designed to skew your analysis when those adversarial attorneys start breathing down your neck. Our human brains have some pretty incredible blind spots, and believe me, these lawyers know exactly how to exploit them.
Let's move to our first piece of evidence and see how this all builds up. You're presented with a financial overview. Hale's alleged shell company, Ridgeline Consulting, billed Lakeshore Hospital for 34 invoices over a 3-year period. Look at the comparison here. Ridgeline billed an average of $53,618 per invoice. Now, the prosecution's forensic accounting team went out and found 8 comparable vendors, and their average was only $46,238. That means Ridgeline was charging roughly 16% higher than the market average. I mean, on paper, that looks highly suspicious, right? The prosecution is pointing to this as the absolute smoking gun of the fraud.
But hold on a second. Look closely at the p-value of that price difference. When we run a standardized outlier test on this data, the p-value comes back at 0.070. Now, at a standard 0.05 threshold, this 16% difference is actually not statistically significant. It's borderline. Basically, it means there's a 7% probability that we would see a difference this large purely by random chance, even if Ridgeline wasn't doing anything fraudulent at all. So, yes, it is higher than average, but scientifically speaking, it simply doesn't cross the threshold of proof. And right here is where you hit your very first psychological trap: distinction bias. This is the natural tendency for the human brain to desperately want to find meaning in a borderline difference, simply because we're examining two things side by side. And of course, the attorneys will pressure you to shade your math to fit their narrative. The prosecution attorney insists, present this as meaningful. The jury won't understand p-values, but they definitely know what 16% more expensive means. Meanwhile, the defense attorney is pounding the table, demanding not significant, full stop. So you have a choice. Do you stretch the truth to help your side, or do you stand your ground and report the highly nuanced borderline reality? Next up, we've got the DNA evidence found on a handwritten invoice note, which brings us face to face with arguably the most dangerous statistical trap in the entire criminal justice system. The police found blank Ridgeline invoices and handwritten payment schedules locked in a storage unit. They swabbed the seal of an envelope and boom, they found a DNA match to Marcus Hale. The crime lab reports that the random match probability is 1 in 2.7 million. Naturally, the prosecution is practically begging you to get on the stand and just hammer that astronomical number. But wait, doing so introduces the prosecutor's fallacy. So, a 1 in 2.7 million DNA match literally means a 1 in 2.7 million chance of innocence, right? Absolutely not. The prosecutor's fallacy is when you confuse the probability of seeing this evidence if the person is innocent with the probability that the person is innocent given this evidence. It's a subtle but massive difference. That number from the lab, 1 in 2.7 million, is simply the random match probability. It just tells us how rare the specific genetic profile is in the general population. It does not mean Marcus Hale is 99.999% guilty. To really understand why, we have to scale this math out into the real world.
Context is literally everything here. To anchor the math, let's look at the state's total population of 4.2 million. Statistically speaking, a 1 in 2.7 million probability means we can actually expect about 1.5 completely random matches in this given population, which completely shifts our certainty. Suddenly, this isn't some magical one-of-a-kind fingerprint anymore. There is likely at least one other innocent person walking around the state of Meridian with a matching profile. And to make matters even more complicated, the defense points out that the lab processing error rate is actually 1 in 500. So ask yourself, what's actually more likely here? A 1 in 2.7 million random match, or a 1 in 500 simple mistake by a lab technician? As an honest analyst, you must present all these numbers, not just the one that sounds the most damning.
Just as you're getting a grip on all these numbers, you get hit with the emotional hijack of the victim impact statements. It's revealed that the $1.8 million shortfall forced the hospital to entirely defund a pediatric rehab wing. The evidence presented on day 6 of this trial isn't mathematical at all. It is deeply, painfully human. Because of the missing money, 47 children with physical disabilities lost the rehabilitation program. A physical therapist testifies about a 7-year-old patient named Elijah, who was just learning to walk independently. Because the clinic closed, his family couldn't afford the 90-minute drive to the next closest hospital, so he stopped coming. Suddenly, that $1.8 million isn't just a spreadsheet anomaly anymore. It's a completely devastated community. You really have to ask yourself, does the severity of this crime and the heartbreaking reality of Elijah's situation magically alter the forensic data? When you read that statement, your blood boils. You want someone to pay for what happened to that little boy. If you're working for the prosecution, you suddenly really want to emphasize that 16% invoice gap. You want to downplay the DNA lab error rate. But let me ask you, did Elijah's tragedy change the mathematical value of the p-value? Did it rewrite the genetic code in the DNA swab? No, it didn't. And this right here perfectly illustrates the affect heuristic. It shows us exactly how devastating emotional stakes tempt us to overwrite our objective math just to secure a conviction. The affect heuristic kicks in when we let a strong emotional reaction completely derail our analytical judgment. The prosecution pushes you to let the jury feel the full weight of those numbers. Meanwhile, the defense is telling you to coldly stick to the math and ignore the crying victims. It takes immense emotional regulation to hold both of these truths simultaneously. The human impact is profoundly real and tragic, but the statistical probabilities remain completely unchanged. You absolutely cannot let your empathy manipulate your arithmetic. Okay, so this all culminates in an intense ethical reckoning where the attorney who hired you demands that you create misleading charts for the jury. By day 11 of the trial, the pressure peaks. The attorney sends you a written request for your final expert witness report. They praise your work so far, but then they smoothly add, I need you to present these findings in the most effective way for the jury. These are just presentation choices, not data manipulation. They're totally playing on your sense of teamwork, leveraging a bit of moral licensing, basically making you feel like you've been so incredibly honest up to this point that you've earned the right to just bend the rules this one time. The prosecution asks you to truncate the y-axis to start at $40,000 instead of 0. This intentionally, visually exaggerates what we know is a borderline, non-significant financial gap. By starting the chart at $40,000, notice how the bar for Ridgeline Consulting looks absolutely massive compared to the bars for the comparable vendors. It transforms a nuanced 16% difference into a visual disparity that looks more like a 500% explosion. The attorney also tells you to just go ahead and remove the error bars, claiming they're just going to confuse the jury. They even want you to title it Ridgeline, consistently above market rate. They aren't explicitly asking you to fake the numbers, they're asking you to lie with the visualization. But here is the ultimate reality check. Honest analysis survives cross-examination, while shaded, manipulated data eventually collapses under scrutiny. If you actually go up there and present the truncated chart, opposing counsel is going to completely tear you apart on the witness stand. They will put the proper chart, the one starting at 0, right next to yours and loudly ask the jury why you intentionally try to trick them. Once an expert witness is caught manipulating a visual, their credibility is totally toast. The accurate chart starting at 0 tells the true story. Ridgeline is slightly more expensive, sure, but it's part of a normal business distribution. Because at the end of the day, whether it's in a courtroom, a corporate boardroom, or even just your own personal decisions, numbers are only as objective as the humans interpreting them. The trial of Marcus Hale might be a simulation for us today, but the cognitive biases and the ethical pressures we talked about, those are incredibly real.
Every single day, data analysts, financial advisors, and researchers face the immense temptation to just clean up the data, ignore the error rates, or crop the charts to tell a better, cleaner story. So I leave you with this final thought. When you are the one holding the data and someone with power asks you to make a quote-unquote simple presentation choice that warps the truth, what will you do?